When you need a lawyer, choosing the right lawyer to represent you is one of the most important decisions you can make in your life. Today, we talk about what you need to look for and what you don't need to look for when choosing a lawyer to represent your case. Welcome back, guys. Andrea and I are here, #lawyer, ready to go again and bring you guys more insightful and useful legal advice.
I know today's takeaway is going to be chock full of concrete tips and tricks for y'all.
Well, and we've got another segment for sure. And we've got another segment we're excited to introduce today called Closing Arguments. We're going to, after we cover kind of our main topic, we want to close the show out by letting you know about some stories that we maybe just didn't have enough time to cover, but we think you need to look into. So we're excited to bring that to y'all today. And so today, the big takeaways we want you to walk away from after listening to our show today are, what do you need to look for in a lawyer? And what are some things that really don't indicate whether or not someone is a good fit for you as your attorney? And this is something, Andrea, you and I have these conversations with our clients all the time.
All the time.
And especially if it's a client that maybe we don't handle that type of work, but we're going to refer it somewhere. It's very hard for people who are not lawyers to tell unless they've had experience with a particular lawyer. It's sometimes hard to tell whether or not someone is a good lawyer or not. I mean, that's kind of your perspective as well, right?
Oh, 100%. I've had several people come to me and ask me, hey, I have a car wreck case, or I have a issue with setting up the documents to create an LLC for my catering company. Can you do that for me? And I'll say, well, I don't do LLC drafting and I don't do car wreck cases, but I can find you someone who's a good lawyer that I know and that I trust, and I can refer you at least one, preferably two people for you to go check out and talk to. I don't do it, but I know someone who will. And we run into that all the time.
For sure. And I equate it to the same thing as unless you've worked with a car mechanic before or you know a lot about cars, it's hard to tell if you've got a good car mechanic. It's hard for me to tell if someone's a good doctor or not unless I've worked with them. And obviously the danger in that is you don't want to walk in and be the guinea pig to learn whether or not someone's a good professional or not. And I think, I was thinking of some comparisons. I think it's a lot easier to maybe pick out a good carpenter or a good architect because you see an actual tangible physical product there that you can make your own judgment from just by looking at it, versus with us, it's work product on paper, a lot of stuff that our clients don't necessarily understand. It's just a tough situation, right?
Yeah, and I would actually add to that as well, in that because we're offering these intangible products and because the law can be so academic and removed and esoteric at times, what a lawyer will see, like, for example, in a family law case, a child custody schedule, one person will see it as, wow, you didn't get mom 100% sole custody, the child never sees dad, you lost. Versus lawyers would look at that and say, wow, you got a great possession schedule for mom. They recognize the fact that it's almost impossible in the state of Texas to get 100%, sole custody to mom with no visitation rights to dad. And so I think it's really difficult for a lot of people to even, when hearing about the results that a lawyer has gotten for someone else, to even have a framework in which to evaluate whether those results are good and if that's something that will work for them.
Yeah, absolutely. And it is all relative because every case is different. All the facts are different. And so wanted to kind of walk through what I see as the three most important things when you're looking for a lawyer. One is the actual, what do you do to search for one? What are the important things you need to look for in a lawyer? And then what are the things that I call them stats that really don't matter as much, kind of the myths that you see a lot of lawyers preach about and market about that may or may not matter, or you see non-lawyers really want to ask, potential clients, they want to ask, these certain things. And so I think it's important, it's practical, and I think it'll really help our listeners as they go through, if they ever need a lawyer, good or bad, whether you're in a good or bad situation, it'll help them kind of go through it. So obviously there's a lot of traditional ways to find a lawyer. The Google search is the most obvious one. But I think digging deeper into that, you've got a lot of sites like AVO, which is AVVO. There's Find Lawyer. There's an organization, Texas Super Lawyers. There's a lot of different websites that have lawyers on them, and they talk about lawyers. And what are your thoughts on using those sites to seek out an attorney?
I think that it can be a decent place to start if you're someone who doesn't know any attorneys and doesn't know anyone who's ever worked with an attorney. But frankly, those sites, along with magazine publications like D magazines, lawyers, or, top lawyers 30 under 30, or Forbes lawyers, a lot of times publications like that will just really be popularity contests.
Right.
And you may be getting a good lawyer, you may not, but you also may be way overpaying for a good lawyer. So I think at the end of the day, while websites and magazine publications can be helpful in like creating your initial search parameters, they are not the be all end all. I think the best way to initially start going about and identifying who would be a good lawyer is by word of mouth.
100%. I 100% agree with that. And, Andrea, you've known me for a number of years, and I've always preached that because, like we talked about at the beginning of the show, having someone that has gone through and experienced whatever issue they experienced with their lawyer, you're getting a firsthand view of how were they treated, how did the lawyer perform, how did they feel about it. And, you touched on it just a second ago, but a lot of these advertisements, whether they're in magazines, on newspapers, or Google Ads, or Avo, and some of these other sites, a lot of them are just paid for advertisements. I mean, and I don't, we've always said we're going to be blunt and honest on this show. Yeah. I mean, look, I've paid for some of these awards. Some of the awards we have, they're peer nominated, but to receive the award, it's more of a marketing ploy that, you pay your $300 or $400 to this company, they give you an award and say you're top 40, under 40 or whatever. And you didn't get there for no reason, but at the same time,
you still had to work to get there,
but it's a paid marketing deal. And so that's why a lot of those sites, they're a decent place to start, but they're not necessarily the best place, because having a conversation with somebody, especially if it's another lawyer that you trust, who's a friend, family member, colleague, that's really probably the best place, right?
Now, the one caveat that I would add to that, right, is if you are looking for someone who is a specialist, or if you're looking for someone who is, you want to make sure that they're licensed in a very interesting jurisdiction.
Right.
So a good example would be if someone is claiming on their website that they specialize in family law. I think what a lot of non-lawyers don't realize is that there are actually ethical rules that govern whether or not you can advertise yourself as a specialist, and you can only be a specialist in certain fields and only after you take the appropriate certifying exams and pass them.
Yeah.
So looking things up on government websites like that, well, not necessarily government, but like the Texas State Bar website, that can be helpful in determining if that person is actually telling the truth. And you're also going to want to look at that person's disciplinary history, if they had any disciplinary actions. And you can find that on the State Bar of Texas's website if you're looking for an attorney.
Right, absolutely. And that actually jumps right into our second area of what are the important things to look for when you're looking for a lawyer. So let's say this is past the search point, and this is more about once you meet the attorney and you start talking with them. And by the way, this is a question I get a lot. Lawyer and attorney, the same thing, just a different noun for the same profession. So there's no difference there. It's different than like in England where a barrister and a solicitor are different. So just to clear that up, lawyer, attorney, same thing. People have different preferences for what they call them. But
gotta love the English language.
Right, for sure. But you were talking about being board certified. So
yes.
That's one thing that to become board certified, and just in general, there's certain areas of the law you can become board certified in. And Andrea, I know you're familiar with that. Why don't you kind of walk through that with our listeners?
Absolutely. So there are only a few areas where you can be board certified. Examples of that would be family law or civil trial litigation, and
construction litigation,
personal injury. And then, is there one for criminal, Austin? I can't recall.
There is. Yeah, there's criminal. There's appellate. There's appellate trial practice, and I believe you can be board certified in bankruptcy and maybe a few other specialty areas.
I think so. Also, in bankruptcy, you have to. That's a unique area, because in order to get into both bankruptcy and in patent, to say that you can practice in either bankruptcy court or the U.S. Patent Court, you actually have to not only pass another exam in order to be specialist, but in order to practice in those courts, you actually have to take special bar exams to get into those courts and be eligible to practice. You can't, if you're just a California lawyer, you can't say, oh, I'm going to do a case in patent court. You actually have to be admitted by passing an exam to get in.
Right. Right. And the board certification exams, kind of diving into that, that's something that requires, a certain amount of years of experience. You've got to have a certain amount of trials under your belt.
Especially with family law.
Right. And a certain amount of just different experience levels. And the idea is that this board certification is an indication to the outside user, the client, that this lawyer has kind of ran the gauntlet and has the experience that comes with being board certified. They took an exam to get there. And so that's something that there's a large amount of lawyers that have that, but it's not a majority. And so if you find a board certified lawyer, you can assume that you're getting someone who knows what they're doing in that specific area of practice.
That they have quite a bit of practice experience.
Right, absolutely. And usually they're going to be somewhat older because they've got to have that amount of experience to get there.
Yeah.
And so that kind of goes into another stat of mine that's important, which is years in practice, the amount of years of experience. And some people may think when I say that, it means that you've got to have someone with a lot of years. But I think it's really more of a question of what are you looking for in your attorney-client relationship that I think dictates what's important about those number of years.
And I think it's important, too, for our listeners to understand that you don't pick an attorney the way you pick a fine wine, right? 100%. So just because an attorney has been practicing for 50 years in civil litigation, that doesn't mean like a 50-year wine, not a sommelier, right? But like generally, if a wine has been aged for like a really long time, I think it's supposed to be good. That's not how you pick a lawyer, because laws change, right? In the last 50 years, a lot of laws have changed, and there's been a massive development in technology. So older is definitely not necessarily better.
Right. And look, we're not going to sit here and lie. I mean, it's obvious. We're younger lawyers.
Oh,
and so
obviously.
we're going to be a little biased. But what I will tell you, especially in my experience, is that there can be some lawyers that as they get older, they become jaded to their practice, or they get into a very niche practice. And if you get outside of that niche, they're just not comfortable doing those things. And that's not a criticism. That's just the nature of it. Sometimes younger lawyers, and honestly, our firm has been hired for this for a number of times, is that you've got lawyers that are hungrier. They're going to hustle the case harder. They're going to work the case down harder. You may be able to identify with them and feel like you're walking side by side with them because they're just more down to your level as far as understanding and communicating. And so depending on what you're looking for, that's kind of what you need to understand walking into the meeting is, am I looking for someone who I can just kind of hand the ball off and I want them to use their experience to do whatever they're going to do, or somebody who feel like is fighting in the trenches with me. And that's different with different types of cases, when you look at a family law case versus maybe a tax law case or something like that. But understanding what those two different attributes bring to the table is important.
I think that is really critical. And I think it's also important to understand that what the subject matter of your case is and the level of technology that's going to be involved in that case.
Very true.
One, because oftentimes younger lawyers will have an advantage over older lawyers in that, because like Austin, you and I, like you said, are young lawyers. We have grown up with technology. We have grown up with cell phones. We have grown up with social media. This is second nature to us. It's easy for us to review and access and build up the cell phone technology and social media evidence portions of our cases. Sometimes that can be difficult for an older lawyer who is not used to thinking, oh, maybe I should look at this person's Instagram. I should ask for their DMs in order to review that.
Right. 100%. No, I think that's a great point. And you touched on something else earlier that is similar to the age part, but it's the areas of practice. So yes, we talk about this on our show a lot. You want a lawyer that's comfortable handling certain types of, well, let me back that up. Let's just use family law for an example. Someone who doesn't practice family law, you don't want your uncle who is a tax lawyer or only handles corporate litigation handling your family law case. He or she,
exactly.
Your uncle, he could probably figure it out, but there's some nuances there that, unfortunately, you got to kind of know the game to play the game.
Absolutely. And if our listeners will recall back to one of our earlier episodes about trademark litigation, and we made it very important there, or a very important note there, that if the individual is not well versed in the various areas of trademark and copyright and patent law, you could be missing out on a lot of opportunities to not just protect your brand through using the appropriate intellectual property protection, but you can lose your brand and the protections if the person isn't familiar with the field and doesn't know what the correct procedures are to continue to file the right documents to make sure that your brand is protected.
Absolutely.
So just like with your family law situation, a tax lawyer generally probably doesn't know the ins and outs of family court, and family court's like the wild, wild west. So
it's a lot of fun, you know?
Rules.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's fun. Strap on your boots, though.
Yeah. Well, I'm a little biased when it comes to that because I do practice in family court, but I do. There's a question. Question and a point that's made to me a lot, and earlier on in my career, I had to answer this a lot in some of the consultations I have with clients. Some clients want to know, okay, well, I'm coming to you for my divorce, and your firm, and I'll go hypothetical instead of talking about mine specifically, but say your firm handles personal injury, like car wreck cases, they handle divorces, and then also criminal defense, DWIs, drug cases. And so the client wants to know, well, I've got this other firm that I've talked to that all they do is family law. And so why would I want to hire your firm? And I think, again, there's goods and bads to both sides of those things.
Sure.
What's your perspective on those two types of situations?
Absolutely. So there are definitely pros and cons to either situation there. I think the pro of hiring two different firms and one that specializes in just family law is that firm probably has more attorneys that are board certified in family law. They probably on the whole have been practicing longer. That's all they do. They're probably very good at it. They know the ins and outs. But as to the con, you're going to be paying a lot more, because if you have both a family law situation that you need handled and a criminal situation that you need handled, you're going to have to be spending time with probably two different sets of attorneys, giving probably overlapping information to two different sets of attorneys. And that's just a lot of bills to stack up and to pay. And at the end of the day, the firm that is the full service firm may be just as good at the family law stuff. And so you're able to be more efficient if you would do everything in-house with one firm.
Yeah. And I think that sometimes you even run into a situation where, let's say that you've got a firm, let's say you have one case and you've got a firm that is a general practice firm. And when we say general practice, usually it means handles multiple practice areas, doesn't just focus on family or just focus on criminal. A lot of times there tends to be the idea that, okay, well, if this firm is solely a family law firm, then we should go with them if I've got a family law situation. And that may be important to you, and that's something you kind of need to figure out if that's really a big focus of yours. The other thing is that there's a lot of areas of law that end up overlapping, and so you could have a situation, whether it's a business litigation case that has some family law elements to it or whatever. So sometimes it's important to have a general firm that can kind of dance between a couple of these areas because they have experience. And so unfortunately, we say this all the time, it depends on your situation.
It depends.
And what you're dealing with as to what type of firm you want to go for. But it's important to understand that there are firms that specialize in only one area. There are firms that handle multiple areas. Depending on your case, one might be a better fit than the other.
And I think a great analogy in that situation would be like when you're shopping for a doctor, right? It's always good to go to a GP and have a good relationship with your GP who kind of knows your overall health history, and they're able to identify what areas you are going to need a specialist. A GP isn't going to be performing neurosurgery on you. They're going to refer you to someone who does that. And I think it's similar sometimes with some firms. They're able to handle a variety of issues in-house, and they're going to be able to tell you, if you've been with them long enough, that your situation has grown such that it will require a specialist in tax law, a specialist in criminal, or a specialist in family, because it's a very niche, small area that only a few firms do within that already specialized area.
Yeah, absolutely. And going off of what you were just talking about, the situation where maybe a firm has to refer somebody out, it kind of goes back to the point that you made at the beginning, which is word of mouth is typically the best way for you to figure out or find lawyers. And through that, one of the other big factors that I think matters a lot is that lawyer's reputation amongst their peers.
That is incredibly important.
Right. And tell me, what do you think, or why do you think that's so important?
Well, I think that's incredibly important because lawyers, at the end of the day, we're all a little selfish in the fact that if we're going to refer you to someone else, we want to make sure that we are referring to you to an individual that we trust, that has a good reputation amongst us, that we know does good work. Because if we send you to someone who does a good job for you, you will come back to us and you will ask us most likely for another referral or ask us to handle something for you. So It keeps us in the loop for you. And then if you're happy with our referral or our work that we've done for you, you'll refer us to your friends, hopefully. And so if someone doesn't have a good reputation amongst the lawyer community, I'm not going to send you, if you have a tax problem, I'm not going to send you to someone who I know isn't really that great at tax law, because then you'll be unhappy with them and you'll be unhappy with me. And especially if I've known you for a while, I care about my clients and I want you to get the best service possible. So I'm going to make sure to send you to someone who I know does good work.
Yeah, and the thing about the peer reputation is that we hear these stories about lawyers all the time. We hear the stories about how lawyers can be such pains, and we, especially as lawyers, get to hear about other lawyers, and we have experiences with other lawyers, and you can tell whether or not someone's really got their client's best interest at heart, whether they actually do the best job they can for their client, or they're just running the bill up. That's why it's so important. And I'm not shy about telling people, yeah, if you're going to go see this person, you're going to spend a lot of money and you're really not going to get a lot of service out of it. They may be a good lawyer, but you're going to spend 3 times as much for maybe something that could have been done for about a third of the price, or someone that maybe stretches the cases out. There's a lot of things that go on out there, unfortunately, in our profession, and we're on the front lines to be able to see that. And so it's better to be able to talk with a lawyer that you trust, who's a friend, family member, colleague, to be able to say, yes, go talk to this person because he or she is going to really take care of you.
And I would also add to that, I think it's very important to when you're getting the word of mouth, is that lawyers, we run in a lot of the same social circles and we have a lot of the same networking events. For example, I belong to something called an End of Court here in Dallas, and that's basically like a grown-up co-ed fraternity for members of legal community. So it's going to be attorneys and judges. And attorneys and judges talk, right? And if you develop a good relationship with some of the judges, sometimes they'll mention that, so-and-so maybe wasn't the most respectful in court, or you'll hear someone discussing with another attorney saying that Judge so-and-so shot Jane Doe down because Jane Doe was being disrespectful in court, or she was being too aggressive, or Jane Doe was late to court. And so it's good to know that some lawyers kind of have an ear in these networking communities, and they're able to hear things from both a judge's perspective and from a lawyer's perspective of what they see in another lawyer in the courtroom. Because so much of how an attorney acts in the courtroom can affect your case.
Absolutely. Well, and it can affect your case because of how the outcome occurs. But also, I think you and I both know that there are certain times when lawyers like to pour gasoline on a fire, and then the fees just shoot through the roof because they're kind of padding their own pockets instead of taking care of their clients. And it's very clear on the other side of the table when you see that happening. And so you want to try to avoid that. And that's one of the things that talking to another lawyer can really help you do. I think as important as transitioning into the myths or the stats that really don't matter that much, I think it's equally as important to understand these situations and these stats. I'm just keep calling them stats that really don't matter.
Of baseball cards.
Well, I mean, and it's appropriate because the first one is the wins versus losses idea. I mean, that's something I don't know that I've got that as much later in my career as I did maybe earlier, and I think TV plays this up quite a bit. I mean, one of my favorite lawyer shows is Suits, and Harvey Specter always talks about he's never lost a case, and we all know that's impossible. That's just not how it works unless you've tried 2 cases in your life. Or
you're a really terrible lawyer, because if you've never lost a case, you're not taking hard cases.
Right, exactly. And part of my frustration with this, and you can kind of tell me your thoughts on it, Andrea, is that you've got people ask you, okay, how many cases have you won? I don't know. I have no idea, because
I don't keep track.
I don't keep track, but also okay, let's take a divorce, for example. It's very rare that anybody wins in a divorce. It's a process that becomes complete, and then there's a outcome typically. I mean, right?
And generally, no matter what you do, someone is always going to say, well, it would have been nice to get A, B, C, D, E, F, G.
Right.
So no one's ever like, yes, I was the winner.
Yeah. And I think, and this is something that we learned in law school that it's kind of preached to us a lot, is that a lot of times you're given facts to a certain case. You can't change what's happened. You can't change what happened. So, let's take a DWI, for example. You can't change what the BAC level was. I may be able to argue about the search, the seizure, the accuracy of the blood, all that kind of stuff, but I can't change the swerving of the car. I can't change how many beers he said he had. Can't change that stuff. And so that's another reason that wins versus losses really doesn't make a whole lot of sense, because, a favorable settlement doesn't show up as a win or a loss. A plea deal that's a really good plea deal in a criminal case doesn't show up as a win or a loss. A business that decided to pay $25,000 to settle a case when maybe they could have had to pay $150,000 doesn't show up as a win or a loss, but it was a good counseling decision that you helped the company come to the conclusion with because you're a good lawyer. And so wins versus losses, if a lawyer wants to tout that kind of a record, you're probably not in the right place anyways to start with.
You might want to leave.
Yeah, I think so. So, I mean, that's my number. That's my first one I always think of. The second one is something we talked about earlier. It's the awards and recognitions that are around the office. And this one's a little bit of a double-edged sword, but I do think people need to be careful that just because this lawyer was top lawyer in McKinney for the last 4 years, okay, maybe that matters, maybe it doesn't. You probably need to kind of delve into some of these other factors we talked about earlier to really figure out whether it's a good fit or not. Yeah,
you want the entire picture in order to determine if that lawyer is going to be a good fit for you. Because so much, too, once you get past just the basics of, is this lawyer qualified to practice in my state? If they're saying they're a specialist, are they actually a specialist in this field? And do they not have any disciplinary history? Okay, well, at the end of the day, I am not the right fit for everyone, right? Because I can be assertive, but I am not going to be overly aggressive and say, I'm going to go out of my way to make the discovery process really expensive and difficult to the other side just to stick it to them. That's not my style. Some lawyers are like that. My style is, let's be efficient and assertive and run a lean, efficient, but thorough case.
Right.
And that style is not for everyone, and that's fine. But if that's how you want to practice, then you should find a lawyer like that. If you want to be really aggressive and run the bill up on the other side, then you need to find, and that's important to you. I'm not saying that's a good thing, but if that's what you want, then you're going to want to try to find a lawyer that fits that for you, because not all lawyers are going to do that.
Right. All right. Absolutely. And speaking of bills, the billable hour rate is a stat that I don't think you can read too much into. And it goes both ways, right? So you can have lawyers that have really low billable rates. You can have, and when I say billable, for our listeners, lawyers in most cases tend to bill by the hour, and that's how you're charged. You're charged a certain rate per hour that the lawyer works, whether it's $100, $200, or $900 or $1,000 an hour. There's different ranges based on different things. And I think that some people assume that if you go to a firm where the lawyer is charging a higher rate, that means that, okay, this is the best lawyer. This is the lawyer I need to have for my case because it's a good fit. Or I'm looking to not spend as much money. I need to go to the lawyer that charges the lower rate per hour. I think that that can be misleading, right? Because you can have lawyers, and I would like to hear your opinion on this, because you can actually save money sometimes with the lawyer that's billing the higher rate.
You can. But I think it's also important to note that just because a lawyer has a lot of experience and they've been around for a long time and they charge $700, $900 an hour, that doesn't necessarily mean that you'll get more efficient service and that you'll get a better result than a lawyer who maybe has been practicing for, only 10 years as opposed to 30 years. But that lawyer only charges $400 or $500 per hour, because maybe the lawyer who only charges $400 or $500 an hour and is younger has been doing, for example, aviation cases for the last 8 years of his practice, versus the lawyer that's been around for decades and charges $900 an hour, has done a lot of different work, but he has only ever touched a couple of aviation cases. He's not going to have that same level of experience, and you're probably going to get a better service with someone who has more experience in the specific field that your case is in. So in that case, more expensive is not necessarily better.
Right. And there's so many things that go into what that number is going to be, that billable hour rate. I mean, there's a huge discrepancy between larger firms because they have a lot more overhead versus smaller firms, versus years of experience, versus what area you're practicing in. And so, in my opinion, I think that all these other stats that we talked about with that you should look for, those are more indicative of what kind of service you're probably going to get versus, or how you feel about that lawyer versus what their actual hourly rate is.
And I would say one more thing as to the hourly rate. Don't just ask about the hourly rate of the attorney you're meeting with. You're probably meeting with a partner at that firm. The partners at the firm, on the whole, will charge typically substantially more than an associate. And a little known fact to people who are not in the legal world is that a lot of the case, no matter what the case is, especially if it's litigation and there's discovery involved, is going to be performed by paralegals and associate attorneys. Associate attorneys are generally the youngest attorneys in the firm. They've only been practicing like 1 to 5 years, and their rates are going to be a lot lower, and they're going to do a lot of the grunt work, if you will. And so ask about their fees and make sure you understand how much they're charging and how much involvement the senior partner is going to have, because that will also affect your billable rates. And just because an associate attorney has much lower rates doesn't mean they're not qualified or they won't do a good job.
No, I think it's a great point. It's a great question to ask, especially at a firm that's staffed that way, is understand how those bills are going to be made, and also understanding how the communication is going to go. I think that's a big complaint that we hear a lot with lawyers, with people who have bad experiences with lawyers, is what is the expectation for when I'm going to receive phone calls back, emails back, who am I going to be speaking with, all those types of things that are really important as you go through and try to choose your lawyer. You know, the thing I wanted to end with as far as takeaways was concerned is that I think all of these stats are important that you need to look for. I think those are all important things to consider. I think that you need to avoid considering some of the factors that we just talked about. But I think the number one overarching factor when choosing a lawyer is that you need to meet them in person as best you can. I mean, as best you can, especially right now during COVID times.
Sure.
But I think that you need to find someone you feel comfortable with, that you trust. Because the whole crux of this relationship is an attorney-client relationship where there is trust developed between the attorney and the client. And if you don't have that, it's going to be really hard to walk through this battle together.
It's really going to be difficult to walk through the battle together, and it will be difficult for you when the attorney inevitably turns around to you and says, hey, I want the best for you, but you need to let me do my job. And you need to let me lawyer you. And if you don't want to listen to me, that's fine, but then you need to go find someone else. I think a lot of people have a tendency to try to micromanage their attorneys because they've watched enough Law and Order or they've watched enough Suits to tell the lawyer how to do their job. And that trust and that relationship needs to be there so that the client can say, okay, you're right, you're the lawyer, not me. I hear you. Can you at least walk with me through my concerns and explain what's going on to me so I feel better? Because if you don't have that relationship, then you're just not going to have a great experience with your legal process. Right.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Well, guys, I hope you were able to take away some of our important factors today to consider when going out and hiring a lawyer. Excited to have you guys back. We'll be back again next week. And please make sure and stay tuned after this for our closing arguments.
Hint, former royalty is involved.
Guys, we love doing the show. Thank you so much for listening. To help us continue to put out great content for our listeners, please go follow us, #Lawyered, on whatever platform you listen to your podcast on. Leave a rating, leave a review, subscribe to us. Go on Instagram, follow us on Instagram @#Lawyered. We've also got our personal accounts that are listed in the show and that you can see in the show notes. Please DM us with any ideas or questions you have. We want to keep putting out content that you want to listen to, and we want to be able to keep delivering answers to your questions so that you can see what's trending in law and business here in Dallas.
Hey everyone, welcome to Closing Argument. So fun fact, former royalty Meghan Markle and Prince Harry, as everyone knows, had a baby Archie, but they have recently sued in a Los Angeles County court for a paparazzi using either a drone or a long lens camera to take photos of baby Archie in what I believe was Meghan Markle and Prince Harry's own private backyard. So the couple have filed suit for egregious intrusion of privacy by this photographer taking pictures of their young son in their own backyard without their permission, and they are seeking damages because little kids should be able to grow up safely without paparazzi putting cameras in their faces. So yeah, fun fact. And stay tuned for that story. I'm sure it's going to be very interesting. Bye.